Reside Festival BR, numa edição especial Reside Lab Plataforma Pernambuco, de 15 a 31 de março, em diversas plataformas digitais. Acesse www.residefestival.com.br e confira a programação completa.
Olá, boa tarde. Sejam todos muito bem-vindos, bem-vindes. Eu me chamo Clara Camarote. Estou aqui hoje para ajudar a gente a se aproximar um pouquinho mais, né, de diminuir as nossas distâncias nesse isolamento e também as nossas distâncias continentais. E estou aqui para a gente poder conversar um pouco com o Paul Davies sobre o trabalho que ele realiza lá na Grã-Bretanha. E para a gente começar esse bate-papo, para a gente começar esse workshop, eu queria chamar a Paula de Renault, que é a responsável por esse festival maravilhoso. Essa é uma das ações do festival do Reside Lab. E aí, queria chamar a Paula para falar um pouquinho com a gente sobre o festival e a gente começar esse nosso encontro. Paula? Oi, Paula.
Olá, boa tarde. Boa tarde a todos, a todas, a todos. Eu queria falar um pouquinho, né, sobre essa experiência nossa, dizer que nós que realizamos o Reside, nós reafirmamos o nosso caráter prioritário de reflexão, de formação, de colaboração e de intercâmbio com essa residência artística do Paul Davies, da Volcano Theatre do País de Gales, do Reino Unido. Para a gente foi super importante essa residência e esse contato com o Paul, que só foi possível pelo programa Pontes, uma parceria da Oi Futuro com o British Council. Essa é uma parceria para os festivais, né, que resultou num edital para os festivais e que, diga-se de passagem, é o único edital criado especialmente para os festivais, né, para divulgar a produção artística do Reino Unido no Brasil, mas que reafirma a importância dos nossos festivais, o que eu agradeço bastante. A residência do Paul dentro do Reside aconteceu de 15 a 27, e para a gente marcar a importância dessa ação de intercâmbio, a gente abriu o Reside não com uma apresentação artística, mas sim com o início das aulas dessa residência. A gente abriu com a residência no dia 15 e vamos encerrar o Reside com o resultado dessa residência durante esses 15 dias que 20 artistas ficaram trabalhando juntos com o Paul virtualmente. Vai ser no dia 31 nesse canal do Reside, às 19 horas, e que a gente tinha dado o título inicial de Qual o Caminho para os Jardins, mas já se abrasileirou tudo e já virou Qual é o Caminho para a Cachoeira, para as cachoeiras, as aventuras em criatividade digitais, que eu acho super, super legal, super bom esse título. Bom, a gente queria, entretanto, assim, a gente queria compartilhar mais um pouco com vocês, com os estudantes, com os professores, com as pessoas de teatro que não tiveram oportunidade de estar nessa residência e do público interessado em teatro. E, por isso, a gente está realizando esse workshop, para poder compartilhar isso um pouquinho com vocês. Dizer também que a gente já deveria ter realizado isso, desde o ano passado, não realizou essa residência presencialmente por causa da pandemia, e agora a gente, com o resíduo virtual, a gente realiza, que eu acho que o importante é a gente realizar, a gente tem que realizar virtualmente, a gente tem que quebrar essas barreiras, o mundo se aproximou e a gente está realizando, os artistas estão realizando, a produção cultural do Brasil e do mundo está realizando, e isso é de grande importância, né? Queria avisar que a gente vai ter a transmissão simultânea para o português. Quem está fazendo essa tradução é o Ciro Moraes. O Ciro foi o tradutor do Paul durante esses 15 dias de residência e também o seu assistente. Ciro foi uma figura crucial, importantíssima para a realização dessa residência e do do bom encaminhamento também da residência. Muito obrigada, Ciro, e ninguém melhor que ele para fazer essa tradução simultânea para o português. E também a tradução do português para Libras, quem está fazendo é a equipe maravilhosa da Volcano Acessibilidade, o Efraim Canuto e o Plínio Batista. Quem está fazendo a transmissão é o Pedro Freitas, da Périco Produções, que eu agradeço demais essa transmissão. A gente tem que falar, claro, e muito sobre os nossos patrocinadores. Mais uma vez, eu agradeço ao iFuturo, ao British Council e a Oi Futuro por esse intercâmbio, aos patrocinadores do Reside nessa edição especial, que é a Lei Aldir Blanc, de Pernambuco, a Fundarp, Secretaria de Cultura, Governo de Pernambuco, Secretaria Especial de Cultura, Ministério do Turismo e Governo Federal. E a nossa sempre parceria com o SESC Pernambuco e também com as nossas queridas iolandas, a Ivana Moura e a Poliana Diniz, que completam 10 anos do blog Satisfeito Holanda e que estão fazendo o acompanhamento da gente. Então, muito obrigada pela presença de todos vocês. Eu agradeço muito ao Paul essa oportunidade desse intercâmbio e eu espero que ele volte presencialmente, claro, e que a gente desfrute também da companhia presencial dele, que eu sei que também será ótima. Muito obrigada, Clarinha. Eu deixo Clara Camarote, nossa coordenadora pedagógica, que foi muito importante também nesse nosso processo todo com essa oficina. Clara, obrigada, você conduza aí com o Paul, muito obrigada a todos que estão assistindo.
Obrigada, Paula, sempre um prazer, uma honra estar junto de uma equipe como essa. Gente, eu vou fazer uma pequena apresentação de Paul agora para vocês, mas antes de apresentar, eu queria também deixar a ideia, né, para vocês de que vocês estão aí no YouTube, no chat, e que vocês podem, ao longo da fala de Paul, fazer perguntas, comentários, que a gente vai estar observando para a gente poder trazer um pouquinho mais de vocês aqui, para dialogar com ele, e ele poder também dialogar com vocês, e a gente diminuir essa realidade de telas, mais a proximidade de artes. Então, feliz de estar aqui. E é com muita felicidade que eu apresento o Paul. Paul Davies é natural de Swansea, uma cidade do Reino Unido e a segunda maior cidade a segunda maior do país de Gales. É escritor, intérprete, desenhista e diretor, com doutorado em política. Em 2018, foi premiado com o doutorado honorário do Open University por seu trabalho no teatro. Como ator, já participou de muitas apresentações do Volcano, escreveu 3 peças para a companhia, dirigiu e criou várias outras. Fez a direção de trabalhos no Canadá e na Croácia e ensinou em várias academias em diversos países. Em 2020, foi um dos professores do prestigiado Territory Festival em Moscou, na Rússia. O Volcano é uma companhia de arte pequena, mas muito potente, com capacidade de se mover rápida e imaginativamente para que as coisas aconteçam em uma história de inspirar e engajar outras pessoas, trabalhando em parceria e definindo grandes ideias em movimento. Seu trabalho é distinto, excessivo e imprevisível. O Volcano e Paul criam e exibem produções teatrais profissionais de alto impacto em todo o mundo, além de iniciar e gerenciar projetos que vão desde ocupação temporária de prédios, em prédios e em festivais, a workshops, residências, exposições e publicações. Esse é um pouquinho de Paul e um pouquinho do Volcano, que a gente está aqui para poder conhecer um pouco melhor. E aí, Paul, te convido com muita felicidade para você poder trocar aqui com a gente um pouco dessa sua história, trajetória e pensamento. Seja muito bem-vindo.
Thank you, Clara. Thank you, Paula. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us on this, I don't know what you call it, residency, seminar, or just talk. Mostly, I will talk for a little bit, but I really would encourage everybody to, if they have questions about our work or this process, how we managed it, or particular questions, and if we can answer them, we will, and I will. I sometimes think theatre is, if you're not involved in theatre production, it's a mysterious job to have. And when I first started out in theatre, I used to go to, let's say I would go to a bank or an office, and I used to look on at the people in the bank who were giving the money out, or the people in the office, and they were always in a nice white shirt and suit, and they had their little things next to them in their desk. And I used to envy them and think, oh, I would really quite like to have that kind of certainty about my day's life, how it would be. And I would go to work on the same time every day and have my lunch at the same time and leave at the same time. Because of course in theatre, everything is uncertain, and everything is sometimes, like in Alice in Wonderland, everything is upside down. But there's something beautiful about being involved in a world that is temporarily upside down for 5 weeks. We don't want upside down world all the time, because we would feel seasick. But in any case, maybe it's okay as well to feel like occasionally lost in the world of theatre, like lost in the mystery of it, and see the difference between the ordinary job, if you have one, if you are lucky enough to have one, and the upside down world of theatre. In fact, one of my questions to the Brazilian participants was, when you're at a party, at a cocktail party or a festival, and someone asks you, what do you do for a living? Do you sometimes not say that you're an actor? Do you invent perhaps a different job for yourself? And so that was quite interesting, because it's complicated to describe what you do as a performer, or as a choreographer, or as a producer. Maybe it's just easy to say, oh yeah, I work in the store downtown. And how bizarre that is, that but we are in the business of inventing. So let's just hold our hands up and say, yes, it was all our fault. We invented everything. But you know what? I reckon people in the world now especially need inventors. They need people who can dream up stories and dream up beautiful visions, because it's tough. It's tough out there. I know it's tough in Brazil, but it's tough pretty much everywhere. And part of that is about coming back to where we are. We were all children, and we all had imaginations, and those imaginations were nurtured, or sometimes they weren't. But we all had imaginary friends, and perhaps now it's time to convert imaginary friends into real friends. And those real friends can be digital. They can cross. Now with this wonderful internet, we can have friends all over the world. But we also need to remember, we need to cultivate a softness, a gentleness, and a friendliness closer at home. And then perhaps our communities would be better for it. And that's part of the thing of theatre, I think. But anyway, you see, I'm rambling already. Let me tell you a little bit, particularly about Volcano. We are, as Clara said, we are based in a small city called Swansea, which is 200 miles west of London. It's a small, slightly forgotten city by the sea. We have that in common with Recife. It's not a city of the arts, although we do have one internationally known famous poet, Dylan Thomas. Swansea is a relatively undeveloped city. It's economically struggling, and it has been struggling probably for a long time. But there's lots of space here. And I think space for me as a person is important, because I get asthma and I like space. It helps me breathe, but it also helps me to dream of crazy, ridiculous projects. It allows me to have a conversation with myself, but also with everybody else. I don't feel the urgency and pace of the city in the way that I did when I lived in London. Anyway, in this small city, we've made many shows, from Medea to Macbeth, from Chekhov to Heine Müller. We toured our work to many European countries, most European countries. I noticed actually the only place we haven't toured is Portugal. But anyway, we've been from Russia to Sri Lanka, from Taiwan to Canada. We've played even in Argentina and in Brazil. A lot of this work we've done with the help of the British Council, but not always. We see ourselves as international. And although we have strong local partners, we look to the international artistic world and beyond for inspiration and even for love. And I hope we always do that, especially as you know, we have the ghost and reality of Brexit. So that in fact makes collaborations with Recife even more urgent and even more important. Volcano was one of the first or foremost, or is often considered to be one of the first companies that emphasized, or at least performance companies, that wasn't strictly a dance organization, to emphasize the use of the body. And this became in Britain known as physical theatre. I don't necessarily know what that means, but I can say that part of the emphasis was because I was an asthmatic, and the woman who set the company up with me had 4 brothers, and she was very, very athletic. And so we were interested in sport and the body, and we often used to go to theatre and think, how come theatre isn't as exciting as sport? So we started to interpret works and make work that was based on our bodies. I'm not sure whether it's appropriate to talk about what physical theatre is, but we can if there are questions. I wrote something about this some time ago, and after we shifted how we made theatre, I thought that one way of thinking about when people said, well, what kind of theatre do you do now if it's not physical theatre? I wanted to say that pragmatism is a kind of method. You test things against the raw material in theatre, and the raw material might be the actors, it might be the script, the poetry, it might be what you think the audience expects or can take. The important point here is that you go back and forth between images, visions, material, and practice. I don't know whether this means theatre is more like a laboratory or a farrier's, where they change the shoes on horses, but it does feel as if you're testing and trying things out. So that led to some other thoughts, and one of the things we did in the residency is I asked the audience, the actors, questions. Sometimes the questions were very truthful and sometimes they were absurd. And these questions come to me now, questions that we ask in the rehearsal room, like, does this feel right for you as an actor? We never asked that question. The question of whether one's character would perform this act, we didn't ask that question. We asked if something was difficult, and sometimes very difficult, we thought it was worth exploring. If something was surprising, we thought it was worth exploring. If something was, dare I say, shocking, we thought it was worth exploring. If we couldn't understand something, it was definitely worth exploring. I used to use a word that I liked. It was called praxis. It was a word from an old Marxist journal. which sought to, it was an academic journal, but it's from a bygone age and it doesn't exist anymore. In the early work, Fern and I used to say that this was going to be the show where we would be tender and soft, but we never managed to do that. And when this is a strange thing, I don't know why I've written this, but when in 1989, when they knocked the Berlin Wall down, shopping really began in earnest. And theatre can, though, sometimes be the last refuge of the sentimental. Okay, so where are we? Where is this strange little theatre company? Who is this strange little theatre company? Well, I guess we are a hybrid organization because we often employ, we don't just employ actors, we employ dancers, but we also employ, obviously, like all theatres, designers, carpenters. We're publicly funded by the Arts Council of Wales on a revenue funded basis for 3 years. And we have a social contract and a cultural contract. And over the course of those 3 years, we're assessed. And then if we're doing okay, we get some more money. We don't get a lot of money. We have 3 full-time employees. We have a digital and visual director, and we have a marketing, we have a executive producer. And obviously we have someone who looks after the money, but everyone else is on short-term contracts. Unfortunately, I wish we could. I used to dream of having an ensemble where we could pay actors all year, and maybe they'd only work for 30 weeks of the year or 40 weeks of the year, but we can't do that. Those days have gone in public funding. But we're obviously extremely grateful for the funding that we get from the Arts Council of Wales. For the last 10 years, we've been in a shop, a largest shop, which used to sell frozen food. Hopefully our shows are not frozen. Hopefully they're more lively than frozen food. Anyway, we're like 50 meters from the high street. The high street is a pretty tough place. It's got a lot of problems. Most of the centre of Swansea has moved out. So we're, excuse me, we're acutely aware of in a way, the economy of the city and our place in the economy, because we're smack in the middle of it. We've got an art gallery, a cupboard where sometimes people perform, and we've performed shows in the cupboard, and also a small studio theatre, which is very historic insofar as it's got all the marks of the previous people who lived there. So the tiles of the old Iceland factory is there, and it's deliberately not a black box. And this is where we've been, and we run kids workshops, classes, festivals for families, conferences. There's been a refugee cinema here, and all sorts of meetings take place here. So Extinction Rebellion used to hold, last year they held their meetings here, the environmental group. So we feel our policy as a theatre, as an organisation, is to have the door open and the street comes in, but sometimes the street is pretty crazy and it's tough. But we get inspiration from that. I think sometimes when a theatre is very formal, the issue that we have struggled with and still struggle with is okay, how do we get people over the door into the building who are not interested in performance, who don't see performance really as for them? We call that the kind of threshold problem. And I think all theatres always have to look at their audience and say, are we just speaking to more theatre makers? You know, don't we want to speak to people who want to stand up and say, oh, this is terrible, we disagree with it altogether, and you know, that sort of thing? Don't we want to, you know, not preach to people who nod wisely at what we're doing because they get all the in jokes and the subtlety? So perhaps you know, maybe that takes us back to Brecht, or maybe it's a Boal thing, or maybe it's just about democracy. I don't know. Right, where shall I start? Oh, I've got another thing about that. Well, maybe I can find it later. I was thinking to read to you, but no. Okay. So this residency began 2 years ago, nearly. It began with an intention for me to come to Recife and work with participants, but then, of course, the pandemic intervened in all our lives, and we had to invent new ways of doing things. And luckily, Paula and her team invented this way of doing things. I hope some of the participants agree with that. Hope they're not going, oh no, I've had 10 days with Paul. That's a joke, but you know, it's also, there's truth in it, because if there is a method to how I tend to work, making a show, or even trying to teach, it's very much against methods. So I like not to plan, and I think a lot of great things in theatre come about as a consequence of accidents, and to being open to surprise and new thinking, or what you see on your journey to the theatre, or what you accidentally hear on the radio, or what somebody says to you on the bus, at the bus stop. So I feel strongly that over planning what you're going to do in the rehearsal room is counterproductive, because then the actors feel like mere pawns that you're moving around. That you know you've made all the decisions, and what's the fun in that? Of course, that if you work like this, you need longer to rehearse. The rehearsal times perhaps needs to be, I don't know, 6 weeks, maybe 2 months. Personally, I don't like rehearsal times that go on and on. But I think I lose the energy of the actors. I lose my energy. But yeah, if you have to rehearse a play in 2 weeks, then of course what you're going to get is generally something that's like Shakespeare off the shelf, or Chekhov off the shelf. So the key word here obviously is improvisation, and that is something that for me is at the center of the creative process, but is at the center of life. I think we need to see every conversation we have, in a way, we make up. I mean, I think women may actually be better at doing this than men sometimes. But you know, somebody who's genuinely listening to you and thinking on their feet, even if you say hello and how are you, is different from somebody who just says, I'm fine, how are you? So the notion of improvisation, usually in my shows, there is always one scene that's 5 minutes or longer, and it's entirely improvised, always. I have to have an improvised scene where nobody knows what's happening. Sometimes it's much longer. But I can't remember the last show I've made recently which has not had a real-time improvisation. And I've also had actors working with me that can't bear that. But, you know, in fact, I made a show called The Populars 4 years ago, immediately in response to the Brexit campaign here, which was a dancing show, which is all danced all the way through, with some dialogue, but very little. And the dancing, most of the dancing was improvised. Almost, you know, it had to be improvised. And it involved the public. So it was very hard for the actors, I have to say. But it was very joyous as well. It was a really joyous, crazy show. Okay, I was talking about improvisation. Yes, partly because for me, when Paula said, okay, let's try to make a digital residency, I thought I wanted to try to do something that I knew that I did or was based partly on what I did in the rehearsal process, because I think then it would be more like, okay, that was a slightly authentic experience for the participants of what it would be like to work with Paul. So that's the idea of, we called them challenges. So what the concept for the residency was to come up with challenges for the actors every day, which meant I think they did 10 challenges, most of them solo, but there was one duet thrown in at the time. So that meant they had to do a huge amount of work. They had to video them, they had to think of the idea and respond to what I'd set, what challenge I'd set. Then they had to get their video phone on the camera and film themselves and send the material in. So I think that was really tough for them. I suppose the challenge I gave to myself in an act of kind of comradely reciprocity was that I also challenged myself not to know what I was going to do the next day. So these weren't kind of challenges really that I'd thought out and thought, oh, this is going to work. So, for example, the first challenge was stemmed from Bolsonaro's insistence that the Brazilian public were whining about their situation and should take responsibility for the pandemic far more than him. So I asked the actors to whine, either in the manner of Bolsonaro or as in terms of their lives themselves. We then did a challenge based on Ibsen's Nora, which was in turn based on Hannah Arendt's idea of the private sphere and the public sphere. And we then went to Ionesco, and then we went to the city, Baudrillard, the beach, and finally we ended up, you know where, with Nelson Rodriguez, who I'd read 5 of his plays. I was lucky enough to find in translation. So in all of this, I was in my mind reproducing the kinds of challenges I gave actors, audiences back in Britain. So to give you an example, when I made Chekhov's The Seagull, the second half of the play, the actors had to perform it in water, water that was just up above their knee, or below their knee. In another show I made about the significance of industrialization in Wales, the actors and the audience had to move about on 10 tons of coal. So their footing was totally, and it was very dark. So it was a little bit dangerous. In Hamlet Machine by Heiner Müller, the audience had to slide down a slide to get to the next space where the performance was. And in a show called Hispaniola, the actors had to perform on a pivot which moved when they moved, so it was very unstable. So everything for me is about, maybe why do we do this would be the proper question, I suppose. And I think in theatre, we can't, I feel we can't take the audience for granted. So we need to remind them that this is live. We can't try and reproduce television. Television is television and film is film, but theatre is a kind of different art form. So it is the liveness of theatre that is significant. The fact that it's a real human body in front of you breathing. It isn't the fact whether they say their lines beautifully, whether they articulate the words correctly and sublimely is of lower significance to me than we go, that's a human being. So how do we remind us that, and how do we feel the humanity of the theatre process? I feel very strongly that that's our trump card, and that's what we need to do to I don't know, to retain the authenticity and beauty of our profession. So I'm always trying to find ways of doing that. Sometimes those ways are silly, sometimes they're shocking, but usually they're surprising, and hopefully they touch people and they go, oh yeah, this is, you know, this is why I love coming to this building, because you're always going to see something different. I mean, it seems to me that the bigger theatre is, the more it's condemned to reproduce the characteristics of film or political rallies, or motor racing. You know, it just seems like you see flashes of beauty, but I guess maybe I really want to see into the actors or actresses' eyes, and then I go, oh, this is really happening. So that's why we did it. That's why I asked the Recifian actors to accept these challenges, which they did. And we produced, I think, just over 100 videos, or they produced just over 100 videos in 10 days, which I think is amazing. It's a huge amount of work, and I think the outcome has been unbelievably creative. The difference, the range of responses to the challenges have been absolutely outstanding, amazing. And I don't think any of the actors would have thought they would have moved in that direction or got there, because they had no idea what they were going to do the next day. I mean, it's not like a process where you go, oh, okay, I'm playing Juliet, or I'm playing Romeo, so I know the arc of this, or I'm playing Jonas, I think it's Jonas in one of Rodriguez's family portraits. I know as a man that I have to be a complete swine all the way through until the end, where I call for someone to shoot me, so I can develop the arc of my journey. But for the Recifian participants of this workshop, I think all they knew was they had to shift every day, shift into some new territory. And I think that's difficult, to remind us that that's the art of performance for me. And maybe it's the art of what it is to be a human, to be able to shift. You know, because we all get stuck the older we get, surely. I mean, it's not, you know, look at that in terms of politics. It's generally the older people get, the more conservative they get. It's rare to find someone who gets older and gets more radical. Off the top of my head, the only person comes into my mind is William Morris, who was the great socialist poet, painter from the 19th century. So anyway, none of this would have been possible, I guess, without the participation of well, my fantastic translator, Cyril Moraes. I don't know how to say his name properly. He's put up with the obscure cul-de-sac of my mind for 10 days, which, as the participants would say, I didn't just set the challenges because I didn't know what they were. So I'd often ask participants obscure questions about, like, if someone knocked at your door, would you accept, and said, look, this is a stray dog, would you accept it, or would you shut the door and feel guilty for the rest of the evening? So I'd tell them stories about, you know, non-hierarchical organizations, and you know, before I got to the point, because I didn't know what the point was. So people were very patient with me, I must say, especially Cyril, but most especially the actors. I'd just like to thank Paula de Reina for welcoming me here, the festival director, the sponsors, and a special mention to Clara, who's watched over us from nearby and afar, as it were. And it's great to see you here today. Stay well, everybody, and stay creative. Thank you.
Ai, que ótimo, Paulo. Eu acho que a gente tem muita coisa do que você falou, me instigou muito a dialogar algumas coisas, fazer algumas perguntas, mas eu acho que também seria interessante para a gente agora ver o vídeo, né, que você separou, para que o público conhecesse um pouquinho melhor desse espaço, né, desses trabalhos artísticos que vocês fazem no Volcano. Eu acho que seria interessante a gente agora poder partilhar um pouco com o público o vídeo, e aí, ao final disso, a gente pode voltar para conversar e fazer perguntas e tal.
Yeah, of course,
Certo?
of course, of course. Yeah.
I
Maravilha.
go out on the streets,
We can recover.
dressed in blood.
Come sail your ships around me and burn your bridges down. We make a little history, baby, every time you call.
Obviously.
Success? What success? I don't like what I write. I don't even like me. I don't know what it is I'm writing about. I love this country. I love the people. And I want to write about them, about their hopes, their desires, their dreams, their aspirations. But all that seems so far away and I'm always so far behind. I feel inauthentic to the marrow of my bones.
Surprised at my degree of uncertainty.
Eita, fantástico! Bom, gente, esse é um momento para que a gente possa fazer perguntas, comentários a partir do que o Paul falou. Eu vou estar recebendo aqui de vocês, então fiquem bem à vontade para ir dialogando. Mas eu queria já aproveitar a oportunidade, né, já que eu estou aqui, para te perguntar uma coisa, Paul. Mexe muito comigo tudo que você fala sobre esse lugar da instabilidade da nossa arte, né? O teatro, ele é, por natureza, esse espaço instável. E que essa instabilidade, ela está a nosso favor, na verdade, porque isso permite que a gente se renove, se reconheça, né? Como você bem disse. Mas como vivenciar essa instabilidade nesse lugar quase... onde a gente tem dificuldade até de imaginar o absurdo. Acredito que todos nós, artistas, nesse momento, estamos vivendo essa aproximação desse espaço de um conflito tão grande, tão para além das nossas imaginações, mesmo com todas as nossas possibilidades imagéticas. Eu acho que nenhum de nós imaginamos estar numa realidade como estamos vivendo agora. Como aproximar a instabilidade para que ela não seja impedidora do sonho, que ela não seja impedidora da imaginação, que por mais absurdo que esteja ali, ainda seja possível ir além do que está estabelecido. Aí eu queria saber um pouquinho o que é que tu acha, como é que você está sentindo nesse momento como artista, com esses desafios todos que você também está passando.
Well, it's a pretty big question, Clara. Yeah, when life is more absurd than art, I guess, and more life has become terrifying, of course, for many people. But I think the question of instability is obviously two actors, two of my actors I use a lot, have been working with me. The one for nearly 10 years, she gave up because it's too difficult to continue, and she's become a teacher. So I think I don't celebrate the instability in some ways. I think it's awful that we spend, like, how much more do we spend on weaponry and mechanisms for killing each other than we do on art or on the public subsidy of things that will help the community. I mean, it's not like well, in the UK especially, our arms budget is huge and our arts budget is relatively tiny, and I'm sure it's the same in Brazil. So I know that there is an equation that says art equals suffering, suffering equals art, but not this much. And I've always felt that maybe especially in our early days, Volcano, the shows were, I think we were in a difficult place personally, psychologically, both me and the woman who founded it. We both came from pretty tough places, and the work reflected that, and it was easy to make that kind of work. But I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. I think now I like to have a rehearsal room that's full of fun and happiness, and I like to work with people that look for the pleasure. I mean, I think it's in performance is really important, and in a residency is to try to, okay, this should be pleasurable. I'm not trying to increase the pain, but how it is that I think there will, in this country, and there will be a restructuring of artistic budgets, and And the problem we've got, and I don't know whether it's the same in Brazil, but certainly in other countries in Europe, is most of the budget goes to buildings, not to people. And it's how we can disentangle the two things, because it seems to me that you don't need a lot of money to make an impact. You don't need a big fancy theatre to make an impact. I'm not against big fancy theatres, but I think when public subvention is going to the upkeep of buildings rather than supporting freelancers and artists, it needs to be both. We need to shift there. But other than that, I don't know. I guess freelance artists who no longer are able to earn a living from theatre, performance, dance, maybe they will shift into other modes of artistic practice, which have always been unfunded, like writing their first novel, or performing and actually on the street and getting paid, or I don't recommend that at all, but I feel that there's definitely a change taking place, isn't there? People are going to leave the professions.
Totalmente. A gente aqui no Brasil tem uma realidade extremamente complexa nesse sentido de poder continuar o nosso ofício, de ter o direito e a possibilidade de ter o ofício que nós temos. Inclusive, a gente não consegue nem recursos para os prédios, não só para os prédios, como para as pessoas, né, como para os nossos espaços. E é muito bom também ouvir esse lugar do prazer, de entender que sim, a nossa arte ela tem um conflito interno, ela vivencia conflitos, mas que precisamos também desse prazer e dessa possibilidade de poder fazer essa arte, né? Senão, de fato, nós não temos como continuar, né? Esse romantismo de achar que vamos fazer a qualquer custo, ele é completamente irreal, né? Precisamos também desses auxílios, dessas possibilidades. Tem uma pergunta aqui, a partir do vídeo que fizeram, que é sobre a participação das crianças nos espetáculos. As crianças que participam dos espetáculos, como entram no processo? Existe uma audição, oficinas? E aí, aproveitando essa pergunta, eu queria que você falasse desse lugar, dessa aproximação, que uma vez a gente conversando, você falou, né, como para vocês do Volcano é importante estar em aproximação com a comunidade onde vocês estão e de criar possibilidades e espaços para que essa aproximação de fato seja realizada e não seja só um prédio para se apresentar um espetáculo e um público ver, e sim um ritual de comunhão, né? E aí eu queria aproveitar para entender um pouco como é que vocês pensam, trabalham essa aproximação do público e os atores e o trabalho artístico de vocês.
Well, I think in some ways it's I don't want to say it's a question of design, how we got there. It's more a question of we wanted to make children's teaching, partly because we felt that creativity in schools is changed. The schools are no longer capable of offering creativity as part of their daily ritual. So we wanted to make creative dance movement, not dance movement. So in Wales, as in most cities, there is a very big prospect for children to take ballet classes. And that's what they do, mostly girls, of course. So it already excludes boys. So, but we wanted to run movement classes that were more creative, that were more actually geared to the question of improvisation again. So not tell children what to do, but give children the opportunity to do what they want to do. And because our space is very chaotic, you see that they want to just run around and go crazy. But then you can, for half an hour, maybe go, okay, try, here is a workshop exercise where there's space for you to do what you want in this way. So that's how we began. And these were very young children, 5 years old to 7 to 8. And then we began with the same principle with older children. They were, second group were 9, maybe 8, 9 to 12. And then the third group is teenagers to 21. So there are 3 classes that run. And obviously the first, there is no audition to be part of the classes. You come, and if your child doesn't like it, fine. But before I talk about anything else, I think what I noticed was, obviously for the young children, the 5 to 8 year olds, the parents came in and they usually sat around and waited for their child. We gave them free coffee, free tea, and they sat around, and sometimes they talked to each other, and then slowly you realize the unintended consequence of having a group of parents who don't know each other in the same space. They suddenly said, oh, I do this, oh, I do that, and then not all of them, but then you went, oh, you are like I met a social geographer, a woman who is an academic social geographer. Oh, you do that. Oh, maybe. And then we talked about public space and in a different way. I learned things from her, and she brought her students to the space and stuff. Or a carpenter said, oh, I can fix your bookcase, to somebody else. So there were these unintended consequences of getting adults into the room who were only waiting. So I think that became very interesting. And then also, when we then had a piece of dance in the space, the adults would bring their children to see the dance, which previously only people who came to see a very complex, could be technical dance, would be people who like dance. But then suddenly you had people who like dance, all very skinny and sensible, appreciating the dance, with children and families. And then that led on to another thing. But also by then I was thinking that I wanted to have children in shows that adults watch. So usually in Britain, we have a very big children's theatre program where adults do things to children. Adults say, okay, now I'm going to tell you a story about a very rich man, a very poor woman, and, you know, a moral. But I wanted to think that we can learn more from the children than they can learn from us. So I wanted to think, so the children, I then just wanted to make the children in the show. So it's new. I only did 3 shows, I think, with children and professional actors. And it's probably very strange for the professional actors. But they know that I want to work in this strange way. So I don't know how difficult it is for them. I think because I try to choose actors that believe in pleasure. They may not believe in children, but they believe in pleasure. So that is one thing. And then also with the middle group, I wanted, because they did this movement, they made a show, one show, 45 minutes, all improvised movement, like absolutely amazing performance. So I wanted to try to think, well, the children can make shows for other children, but they can also make shows for us, for their parents to see, oh my gosh, Josie is doing this. Oh, Cedric is, and because our space has a very big climbing frame, they were hanging off the wood and doing stuff, and parents were closing their eyes because in Britain, they forget that play has become very difficult for us to negotiate as parents or teachers. It's become surrounded by, you mustn't do this, you mustn't do that, whereas we wanted to open things up. So I mean, it's totally a learning process for us, Clara, totally, but a really beautiful one, yeah, for me. Yeah, and it's one of I think one of the most exciting strands of our work has been with children, families. We made a whole festival about this, so yeah, it's cool. Anything else?
Ai, Paul, isso me mexe muito, porque eu concordo plenamente. Eu acho que quando a gente abre, né, as possibilidades para esse inesperado, essas improvisações, e principalmente para pessoas que podem ensinar a gente esse estado de prazer e de brincar. Né? Lembrar que teatro é uma brincadeira, que estamos brincando. Né? E a criança ela tem isso inata dela, ela já tem isso completamente, sem julgamento, sem dizer isso é certo, isso é errado, ela simplesmente vai. Né? E eu acho que também a gente aprende muito como atores, como atrizes, criadores, nesse convívio. Tem várias perguntas que estão chegando aqui, eu vou tentar, né, trazer todas elas para você poder dialogar com o pessoal que está assistindo. Cacá Toledo, ela está perguntando se Paul e os amigos do Reside, boa tarde. São duas perguntas.
Hello.
Gostaria que você descrevesse o espaço... Gostaria que você descrevesse o espaço da sede do Volcano e como é o principal espaço, sala ou palco, de trabalho de vocês aí no País de Gales. E também está perguntando... a segunda pergunta se refere como você, aí no UK, como você vê no UK a distribuição das verbas públicas entre as grandes companhias e as companhias menores como a sua.
Okay. Sorry, I should be able to take you into our space so you could see it, but it's like 20 meters by 15 meters with maybe 3.5 meter ceiling, low ceiling. It's very broken down everywhere, the ceiling, the walls, but it's full of atmosphere and history. It's like when you have an actor who walks onto the stage, the actor has to work very hard to earn the right to speak, because the space is so it's full of like stuff in your eye, so the actor has to really attend to that, to feel it. But it made me very aware of the importance of the human body. I think when we move to this space, it's very different to a black box or something. But I guess it's like a studio, small studio black box, maybe 80 people, depending on which way you make the. We had a very famous comedian, 180 people, 200, but the comedian just stands and goes, wah, 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 I'll tell a story. So for moving around, it's smaller. Yeah. I know, just aside, Peter Brook, in his book, The Empty Stage or The Empty Space, a famous theatre text, he talks about the ability of an actor to come on and say, this is a desert. And everyone goes, oh, it's a desert. Or this is, I am on a Greek island and I am playing the Tempest and there's nothing there and we all go, okay, it's a Tempest. But my feeling is different. I think to magic up a space with a word, with us is very difficult. Okay, the subvention, the question of subvention. I don't know what the budget for the Welsh Arts Council is, Arts Council of Wales, but some big buildings will get over £1 million for the year, for sure. Like a Welsh National Opera company. Opera companies get a lot of money in the UK. Theatre companies way down the list. So the budget, Arts Council of Wales has managed to protect its budget during the pandemic. So they kept the budget and they had very many schemes to distribute money to freelance actors and to keep. So for example, my company, over the whole year we've been closed for the pandemic, they still gave us the money. So we are very lucky, you know. It's like, so, but yeah, there is companies that get over £1 million, but not, they always are in a building, so they have all the costs of the building as well. So we are lucky, of course.
Sim. Paula está perguntando aqui sobre se você tem algum trabalho que você gostaria de desenvolver no Brasil, experimentar com os brasileiros presencialmente. Dentro do repertório de vocês, tem alguma coisa que você gostaria de trazer, de vivenciar aqui conosco?
Sorry, Clara, Ciro, does Paula mean, do I have any work we could bring, like that's already made, you mean? Yeah.
Eu acredito já do seu repertório, do repertório do grupo, dos trabalhos que vocês já fizeram, cenicamente. Qual aquele trabalho que você gostaria muito de trazer para o Brasil e que o público aqui pudesse vivenciar?
Well, the Populars is very little text, and it's about the relationship. It is about Brexit. I made it for Brexit, but there is no stage. The actors just dance. 4 actors. They are not dancers, but they just dance. And sometimes they make the audience join in. But really, it's about the relationship between home and nationalism. The little fragments of text are about how you see your relationship to your city and how that is related to nationalism. But it's very joyful. Can you imagine? Try to imagine. I didn't want to leave Europe, but I tried to imagine 4 people who have a big dancing party because they wanted to leave Europe, and it worked. So I tried to put myself in the terrible shoes, but with pleasure, so it's a very pleasurable experience for the audience who see that show. And there's not much language. I think the Seagull show, the Chekhov show, went to Taiwan, where they didn't speak English, and because everyone knows Chekhov, and it's very crazy but accessible. They are 2 in my repertoire. Yeah.
Ai, espero que venha. Paula, vamos ver se rola aí, porque eu quero ver. Tem ainda também uma pergunta aqui de Cacá, que está perguntando se vocês aí no Volcano já receberam artistas residentes e de outros países, se vocês já fizeram esse tipo de intercâmbio, de troca com países com artistas de outros lugares, de outros países.
Well, yes. Before the pandemic, we had a relationship with a festival in Formentera, which is an island off Spain, and we went there and presented 2 family shows, and they came back and they did 2 shows. So that was an exchange that lasted 2 years, and we hope to bring it back. So anywhere we certainly I always try in my shows to have at least one actor I never worked with before. Could be a Frenchman, could be whatever. In Heine Muller, there was a German actress. In Hamlet, Heine Muller, German actress. I had a Portuguese actress. So yeah, but not an exchange so much. Not like we bring a show, only with the Spanish recently. We bring a show. I'm trying to think of another example. No, I think it's getting more difficult. I would say the international collaborations, even on a European scale, gets more difficult. That's my understanding, unfortunately.
Eu queria aproveitar uma coisa que tu falou aqui com uma pergunta que Poliana Diniz está fazendo, que você, na tua fala, falou desse lugar do desafio, né? De colocar desafio para os atores, de provocar os atores para aquilo que eles não conhecem, para eles se colocarem de forma diferente. E você também disse como você também traz isso para você como diretor, né? Agora mesmo na tua fala, falando que sempre quando você faz um trabalho, você tenta trazer um ator diferente com quem você ainda não teve essa experiência, porque também isso é um espaço de provocação, de desafio. E aí, Polly está trazendo essa reflexão também a partir desse espaço do desafio, dessas descobertas, e ela está curiosa em saber se vocês do grupo têm feito experimentações digitais, na linguagem digital nesse momento, né, de pandemia, e se tem esses trabalhos, onde é que as pessoas podem assistir, onde é que elas podem receber esses produtos artísticos, esses trabalhos, e se você está, né, como é que está sendo isso? Como é esse processo de desafio no meio digital?
I wrote it down, but I missed the first part of that question.
Na verdade, o que eu queria saber é esse lugar de que você se coloca também nesse desafio, né? De você sempre procura coisas para lhe provocar para algo que você não conhece, né? E aí, juntando essa prática sua já como artista, como é que está sendo vivenciar isso nesse momento de pandemia com as criações digitais? Né? Se vocês têm feito criações digitais no Volcano, se você tem experimentado como artista também nessa forma de fazer arte.
Yeah, I think the first principle of usually of my work is that if it's easy to do, you shouldn't bother doing it. Let somebody else do it who's maybe more comfortable or uncomfortable with things. So I know that an old idea from George Orwell was that he thought that democracy and culture required people to swim against the tide, to swim upstream like the salmon that swims upstream. And I feel that if which is difficult, especially because we get public money, but I think the consensus, to stay in the place of where the consensus is not such a good place, which is why the idea of challenge is important. So if I kept on doing things that were easy, it'd be like, whoa, what do I want to do that for? So for example, I made a show in Edinburgh, a duet, a very complicated duet that put prosaic movements, very like tap dancing, but not tap dancing at all, but with a lot of questions. I asked the questions, and Catherine did this very strange dancing. But in Edinburgh, it was very difficult for the audience. They didn't understand it, and I didn't like the energy. So when I came back to this country, back to Wales, I found the answer was that it was too easy for everybody, and really, the whole show should have taken place in a cupboard, in a very small cupboard, which we could just. So the audience was only limited 30, and everything had to be more difficult. Like when you're having a terrible argument with your partner in the kitchen, and the small kitchen is really small, and the argument goes on for too long, and it felt like we had to reproduce that scene. But yes, how is the challenge working in this pandemic? Yes, I did because I wanted to give some money to some of the actors that I'd worked with. I wanted them to have some of this money that we got given by the government, set some challenges for 5 actors, and it's on our website. The link is on www.volcanotheatre.co.uk, and I think some of the work is on Vimeo, but you have to access it via Volcano. And one challenge was Ibsen, one challenge was Ionesco, and the rest I have no idea. No memory at all. But yeah, it's you know, they were good. They did interesting work. That's going back to the question. That's the only digital challenges I've done. The other thing we did during the lockdown with the money we had was, because this building is hybrid, no one knows whether it's a theatre or not. We managed to decide to rehearse a show. So we rehearsed a new Promenade family show, which we never perform yet, but it's ready to go. So it's called The Clockwork Crow. It's like a children's adventure story, but very, very odd.
Maravilha. Tem uma pergunta aqui de Eusébio Arruda. Ele está querendo saber se o Volcano já desenvolveu algum trabalho com deficientes ou para pessoas deficientes.
Disabilities. Yes, in the video clip, if Eusebio saw the video clip, there was about a minute, 2 minutes with the 2 actors were in red boiler suit, and they were working with, we work with a school where the children have radical disabilities. And it was a sensory movement performance, but again, it was not, the people with disability were in the space where they were moving. They weren't just watching, they were touching. And it was based on, no. Anyway, it was based on a very beautiful illustrated children's book by an author called Sean Tan, I think. Yeah, so we work with this school because they are like 400 meters from us. So we always try to make projects, but we didn't want to just present pictures for them. We wanted them to touch us and to hold us and for us to pick them up even, which was tricky, of course. But there's definitely some minutes on the video clip. The show was called Beastly Ongoings, which is funny. I'm trying to find the book. It's here. Beastly Ongoings. No. Ah, Sean Tan. There. I found it. Yeah, it's based on this guy's work. Very beautiful illustrations. Yeah, they are like look.
Uau!
Yeah, really beautiful.
Uau, adorei.
They're really nice. It's called Tales from the Inner City. Yeah.
Uau.
Anyway, so yes, Eusebio, we try to do as much as we can.
Tem uma pergunta aqui de Fátima, que ela quer saber, de Fátima Guiar, ela gostaria de saber como é que os atores e atrizes reagem a esse processo de criação e encenação que vocês desenvolvem.
Yeah. Well, I tried. What's it called? Audition process is long. I make mistakes sometimes auditioning people, and I know that it's not the right person. So sometimes it's a disaster. But you have to give people a chance, an opportunity. But usually, like for example, working with a disability group, we already worked with the actor, and so the woman who worked on the show, we had a good experience, so we knew. But I told a story in the residency of the man who ran Zappos, a shoe company, who wanted very particular people to answer to work for him, and he said, "Okay, answer this question: how weird are you?" And on a scale of 1 to 10, what music would you play? Would we play for you as you enter our building? And then finally he says, "If I give you £2,000, will you not take the job?" Because he only wants people who really love to work in this way. And so sometimes it's hard and you make mistakes, but usually the actors just go, "Oh God," and then they do it anyway. So for example, in the Seagull, when they finally say, "I have to go to Moscow," they put the suitcase down, like in Chekhov, "I must go to Moscow," and they are going to Moscow, so they need to take their clothes off to put new clothes on, but they never put new clothes on, and they have suitcase to hide their body, and they walk towards the audience, and they're like, "Oh no, Paul, do we have to do this?" Yes, you do. And then you have to walk over the body, over the actors, naked, over the audience naked, and they're like, "Oh God, oh no." And, but the audience is like laughing, and it's super funny, and everything is cool then. So.
Ô, Paul, eu queria perguntar uma coisa a partir de uma das coisas que você falou mais cedo, que mexeu muito também comigo, que eu tenho me questionado bastante nos últimos anos como artista, que é como é que a gente pode criar pontes para fazer com que a nossa arte, com que o teatro que a gente faça, não chegue só para os mesmos lugares, para as mesmas pessoas, que ele possa dialogar com a diversidade maior de público. Né? Você falou que isso é uma coisa que vocês estão sempre observando, que é com quem estamos falando, né? O público de vocês, com quem vocês estão interagindo. E aí eu queria saber um pouco mais sobre isso. Se você sente que vocês, de fato, conseguem trazer para a experiência de vocês uma diversidade de público, como vocês têm construído essa possibilidade de dialogar com públicos distintos, com pessoas distintas, não só artistas, não só do nosso meio, mas também fora desse lugar onde nós estamos também.
Yes, that is the key question for the cultural sector, isn't it? I mean, in Britain, we now the organizations that fund arts bodies is really on trying to say you must do this. You must. It's part of the deal, quite rightly, that we have to accept a social responsibility for broadening our audience. But it's not an easy task, because I think for a long time, cultural experience has been considered middle class exercise. And it's impossible now, like Brecht, to go to the factories, because there are no factories. So we 5 years ago, we were lucky. We had open space next to our building, like a big open space for a party. But then, even then, with the door, no doors wide open, big doors, you could see people going, oh, should I cross? Should I cross over? Is this for me? Is this for me? We called it the problem of the threshold, how to get people to cross the threshold. When we had a lot of refugees coming into this building for poetry evening or international evenings, the principal thing that I took away from this experience was food. We have to give food to people. If you give food to people, then it's the beginning of an offer. Without that, so that's now we are talking about a new building, maybe in 2 years' time, but food is the most important thing we can do. Food and then stories, not stories and then food. In our building, for example, to get children to come in, and parents, we built a climbing wall, one with where you could climb upside down. Very small, but okay. And we have table tennis. So everything is free. People come in. If they want to play, they play. And they want to stay. So
Gente, adorei essa estratégia de vocês. Criar espaços de prazer dentro do próprio espaço para poder aproximar as pessoas, né? Isso é maravilhoso. Tem uma pergunta de Sônia que eu acho que você já meio que fala um pouquinho agora, mas dá um foco maior, de Sônia Biebá, que ela pergunta para tu se a poesia tem espaço no teatro.
Do you mean as opposed to playwriting?
Eu acredito que sim. Eu acho que ela está se referindo a esse lugar da poesia enquanto estilo literário, se existe espaço dessa poesia no teatro.
Well, some of the first texts we did were poetic versions of Medea, I think, Medea and something else. So I personally like the rhythm of poetry. It gives us, and of course, one of Volcano's most famous shows, the show we took to Rio and Porto Alegre, was called LOVE, and it was based on Shakespeare's sonnets. But so I think there is a space, but it's how you use the poetry. You can't just say it, because it's theater. People, it will die. But also to say personally, we are planning, our next project is a poem, quite a notorious poem written 25, maybe 30 years ago, called V, by Tony Harrison. And it's a very urban piece of poetry written by a man who is a Greek scholar, actually. but and we made this show a long time ago, and we go back to it. And it's a poem about class. It's a poem about class conflict and division in society, division between men and men, women and women, well, mostly men and women, races. It's all about division. So yes, I absolute, Sonia, yes.
Cira Ramos está querendo saber, Paul, a partir desse processo da residência, né, que vocês tiveram, se você achou os atores daqui muito diferentes dos atores que você está acostumado a trabalhar aí, se você sentiu muita diferença, como é que foi isso para você?
Well, there's nobody quite like Cira or Sonia. And I mean that, really. I mean, gosh. Yeah, I think generally the women, well, the women in Brazil are very playful in their approach to the tasks compared to compared to most of the women in Britain. Yeah, so I think the play, or just maybe not just the women, but the participants in Recife, very playful in their responses. Whereas when I did the digital project in the UK, I felt that they were quite serious. So yeah, I think that's a bonus. That was surprising, Cira. Yeah, for sure. And very quick as well. I think you were very quick to grasp what I meant. Well, you were. I'm not saying everybody was, but it seemed to me that you had an idea very quickly and knew how to frame it. But maybe that's because you're quite obviously an experienced professional.
Maravilha. Augusta Ferraz, que também esteve, né, na residência, ela gostaria de saber um pouco mais sobre a improvisação e a formalidade nas montagens do grupo, do Volcano, esse encontro entre a improvisação e as formalizações. Como é que isso, de fato, se dá nos processos e nas encenações de vocês?
I think I'm going to have to get some photographs of the space, and you could see it's very informal. It's super flexible. It's small, Augusta, so you can see the actor breathing. You can see the soul and heart of the actor. You can see the terror of the actor when they realize they don't know what they're doing. So it's not formal at all. In fact, we had a very famous Turkish playwright present some work here, and all the Turkish people came to see the show, and they all were dressed up, but they were totally shocked at the space. They were expecting it to be very formal, but it isn't. There is no carpets, there's no doors that shut so quietly like the door of a Mercedes-Benz. There aren't enough toilets probably, so possibly that's why it isn't, because of course we present shows which have a formal quality to them, but as I said before, in every show I make there is always improvisation, and there's always an emphasis, I suppose, on the naturalness of the performance, so that it doesn't work well, the space, for a very heightened classical performance. No. Yeah, I don't know what else to say, Augusta.
É muito interessante, porque eu acho que todos nós, né, quando a gente está trabalhando, atuando, a gente sempre fica nesse espaço dessa saber exatamente o que vai fazer e entre o inesperado, né? E eu pessoalmente também tenho alguns anos trabalhado com improvisação e descobri o quanto isso abre o meu universo artístico, mas também isso é aterrorizante quanto a pessoa que está lá realizando, né? Esse lugar do não saber, de ser conduzida puramente pela experiência do acontecimento. Isso, de fato, às vezes deixa a gente um pouco perdida, né? Mas é uma experiência muito rica e muito forte, pelo menos eu acho, como artista. A gente já está
Yes, definitely.
bem adiantada aqui no tempo. Não sei se tem mais perguntas, se tem mais algum comentário que o público gostaria de fazer para Paul. Enquanto de repente está alguma pessoa que tem ainda alguma pergunta, algum comentário, eu gostaria muito de falar, Paul, da minha felicidade de ter tido esse encontro contigo, né? A gente começou o encontro e eu fui desviada desse encontro por causa do que está acontecendo. Eu fui uma pessoa que infelizmente também tive Covid durante esse período da residência e não pude estar junta, né? Mas já desde o primeiro encontro, desde o primeiro momento, eu fiquei extremamente tocada em ver esse teu olhar, essa tua ótica para essa delícia humana que é fazer teatro, né? Desse lugar de brincar, de ter prazer, de entender o teatro não como um espaço de opressão, um espaço de silenciamentos, mas um espaço de comunhão, né? De como a gente pode entrar nessa comunhão. E aí, para mim, foi uma delícia sentir isso. Fiquei com muita curiosidade. Estou aqui com muita curiosidade para poder ir para aí, para que vocês possam vir para cá também e a gente trocar mais. Mas quero realmente agradecer muito essa oportunidade. Quero agradecer a Paula, a todo mundo do festival, essa oportunidade de ter tido esse encontro, né? Num momento em que a gente está com tanta dificuldade em estar com o outro e poder estar com as pessoas, saber também que esse tipo de mecanismo pode ter aproximações que talvez de outras instâncias a gente não teria. Não sei se eu teria tido a chance de lhe conhecer, mas nesse momento, nesse agora, tive. E por isso fico muito grata, muito feliz por esse encontro. Eu acho que não tem mais nenhuma pergunta, pelo menos não chegou mais nada aqui para mim. Mas eu acho que é isso, Paulo. Não sei se você quer falar mais alguma coisa, quer fazer alguma consideração para o pessoal que está assistindo.
Well, maybe that's it, isn't it? That in our very peculiar profession, that that often involves, even if you're a dancer, a professional dancer, it often involves years of articulating with words the technique and if you're an actor, speaking and thinking about what you're speaking and how you're speaking it, learning all that process. There's something wonderful about sharing the silence of what people achieve when they're given a creative space, or the moment when an actor walks on stage and you feel like you're in both in somebody is holding you in safe hands, but also you have a feeling at the back of your neck and in your stomach of vertigo, of like, what's like, that's just beautiful. And that's why we cherish and love our the jobs we can do and the collaborations we can make, and that's what we're hoping to return to, I think. But certainly I feel this experience has certainly been that, you know, I've seen that, you know, in the videos, and I've felt it, you know, and after I'll remember this for a long time. And I, you know, I as I've said, I thank Cyril and Paula and all the people involved in the festival. But there's a very peculiar line from a great Marxist called Walter Benjamin about the angel of history. and Walter Benjamin had a very tragic death on the Spanish border as he escaped, right, almost had one foot in freedom. But it's to do with the angel of history, his quote, but you can look at it up sometimes, somebody, but I felt like meeting, you, Clara, and then you had COVID right at the start, and then now you're back. Is like, that's the arc of real success. That's a real lived experience you've been through. And I don't compare mine to it at all, but I've lived through this experience as well. And I felt you hovering over it, holding us all. So thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Muito, muito grata, Paul. Grata a todo mundo que está aqui, que teve essa tarde conosco aqui. A gente está muito feliz de poder finalizar esse momento do festival. A gente ainda vai ter o momento de compartilhar os vídeos que foram criados durante a residência com vocês. Mas estamos muito felizes de ter tido essa oportunidade também de trocar mais, de conversar mais. E eu acho que é isso. Agradecer a Paula, agradecer a Pedro, Ciro, Efraim, Plínio, todo mundo que está aqui e todos vocês que estão aí atrás da telinha. Muito obrigada pela participação de vocês e espero que a gente possa se ver em breve e continuem aí prestigiando o festival e fiquem atentos para os vídeos que foram criados, que estão muito legais. Eu também fiquei muito feliz e muito impressionada com a criatividade e com as coisas que foram surgindo. Muito feliz mesmo. Acho que é isso, gente. Boa tarde para vocês.
Thank you. Bye-bye.